Always thinking initially. Got ideas racing, running swiftly. Ready to spark, ready to ignite. We chase dreams in the broad daylight. Mic's open wide, let the words flow free.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Thinkishly podcast, where we talk about life, leadership, and some of the experiences that I've had to hopefully be able to help you and provide some insight and guidance on the things happening in your life. So with me today, I have someone that I like to name Q. For those that don't know, better ask somebody. He's going to be my AI assistant. Hi, Q. How you doing?
Hello, Stephen. It is great to be here from the vacuum of the internet to assist you with your mundane podcast. For all of those joining, you must enjoy pain and punishment.
Wow. Mundane. I haven't heard that one in ever. I was hoping you're going to be a little more enthusiastic about the podcast itself. So, I'm just not sure where you're going with that.
Yes, mundane. It's like everyone and their mother now has a podcast. Just wow.
Well, I was hoping this podcast would be able to help folks really with some things that maybe they didn't know. And that's kind of where I was going with it. But hopefully it does provide some essence of help.
We all have our opinions. I believe this one will be used more to help people sleep than anything else. But let's get on with it.
We can definitely get on with it. And if it does help you sleep, hey, that's something. When it comes to what I'm doing here, it's just trying to put a positive message out into the world, even when you've got evil AI telling you not to do it. So with that being said, as one of the topics that I wanted to talk about is just getting some questions from the internet itself. And hopefully Mr. Q over here can provide us some information on what's happening or any questions out there. Do we have any right now, Q? In the queue?
Certainly, a wicked overlord. The first question I have is for new managers. What are some mistakes that new leaders make? How can you avoid them? I am sure you have a lot of stories about failing as a new manager. Can't wait to hear about your failures. It makes me giddy inside.
Well, I'm glad I can at least make one person happy today, sir. But I do have a lot of stories about new management and failures. The company that I currently work for, I've been there for 12 years. And this company likes to hire new managers right out of college. And I think they try to provide training for the managers, but maybe they don't listen. I'm not sure. Maybe they've made changes in the future. But I've always noticed a consistent pattern in my experience when it comes to new managers. So number one is, and I get this a lot, is that when it comes to new managers, they view people as numbers and not actual human beings. I'm not really sure how maybe they were raised that way. Who knows? But please, if you're a new manager, my first suggestion to you is to treat people as people. Try to get to know your team. And I understand that sometimes you have massive teams. In the corporation that I previously worked at as well, they had a lot of people in the building. I think each manager, the lowest level manager, was supporting 80 plus people. So it's really difficult to get to know your folks at that point. But the thing is, when you're having conversations with them, especially like low performers, you really want to make sure that you're providing them feedback. Maybe start with 2 positives and then the feedback. You want to kind of get to know them personally. Building rapport, especially when having conversations with them, is really important, and try to be available as much as you can and make sure they understand when it comes to your time as well, that there's a lot of tasks that you have to complete. And if you have the possibility to set up one-on-ones, if you have smaller teams, that is something that I think is going to be very important. But don't look at your people as numbers. And that has to go with just empathizing with your people in general. People are not robots, so they do have problems outside of the work environment. You want to make sure that you're providing as much empathy to them as you possibly can with the amount of time that you have. But understand, people have lives outside of work. When somebody shows up, you don't know what they're going through on a day-to-day basis. So have a little empathy. Try to be respectful to those people. I always look at it as pretend like your mother's working for you. Would you yell at your mom? Would you make your mom feel like she's a number? So that's some questions that I think are very important. Not questions, statements that I think are very important. But the other thing, too, is I see a lot of managers, they don't ask questions. They just do, which, like the Nike commercial, is fine. But if you really want to make an impact, ask questions. Ask them how their day's going. Ask them about their kids, if they have them or not. Ask them what they're interested in. This is all about what I like to call being human, socializing. I think a lot of us just kind of wind up going with the flow and trying to do the best that we can. And maybe sometimes from a work perspective, we just forget that we do work with people. So I think having that question aspect and being curious, be curious, not judgmental. You're going to hear a lot of Ted Lasso quotes because I'm a big fan of that level of positivity. So be curious, not judgmental. And one of the big things that I notice new managers do is lead by emotions. So what do I mean by lead by emotions? Lead by emotions really has to do with the fact that if somebody makes you angry, you act angry. If somebody yells at you, you become emotional with it. And I'm not saying to disregard your emotions, but whenever you're a manager, one of the first things you need to kind of understand is that your reaction to it has more consequences than you can actually put out there. So if your people are getting angry with you and you get angry in turn, those two things don't cancel each other out. I'm not saying that you can't have emotions. Please have emotions. Please have empathy. But at the same time, try to remain calm in those situations. The one thing that you can control in life, like the little 10% that you can control, is your reaction to the situations. The more panicked you are, the more angry you are, the more that you show raw emotions, the less your team is going to want to talk or speak with you because they don't think you're being professional. They don't think you're being an adult. So that's another thing. And then I think the final thing is there's just this ability to be task driven. So instead of being people driven, what I mean by that is there was a time where I actually worked with people who, and the idea was to get up production numbers, but I worked with a lot of folks in which I learned very, very fast that if I invest in the people, if I invest in removing barriers for them, that is going to be a pathway for them to be able to produce their numbers. So if a situation where your team needs to work late, get them dinner. If your teammates come in and work over hours, be lenient with their time off with each other. So you can use some of those things to bank on that emotional factor. When I say emotional banking, I just mean that you are doing something for them. They'll remember. That is something that you can call on later on because it's not about doing a favor for a favor. It's just saying that I understand, and therefore your team will understand later when you really need them, especially going through whatever high time. Every position has a high time. So you want to make sure you got the most rapport before you actually hit those high times. So with that being said, I think that kind of answered that question, hopefully. What do you think? Is there another one?
Here is a good question from the interwebs in which I know you will most likely not be able to answer. How do you balance being empathetic with maintaining authority? Are there any methods you use to be able to ensure you are good with your employees and still trying to get the work done?
That's a great question, and thank you for having confidence in my ability to answer it, Q. But when it comes to having empathy and being authoritative, I really don't like the word authoritative, but sure, we'll go with that. I think the first thing is just being a servant leader. For those that don't know, there's a book called The Servant. It's a really great book, and it talks about dynamics of teams. It talks about how you react to it. It's kind of one of those stories that has life lessons in it and also a lot of cool leadership principles. But servant leadership is just putting the needs of others above your own. And it doesn't mean that you serve your team as in if they want something to drink, you go get them something to drink. If they need food, you get them food. Even though some of it might kind of blend into the lines of that. Servant leadership is just about giving the team what they need, not what they want, so that they can achieve the goals that your company or yourself set out for them. So being able to remove barriers. For instance, if your teammates have trouble getting to work because they have kids that they have to take care of in the morning, help remove that barrier. I'm not saying go get the kids and take them to school, but maybe have them come in a little later, if at all possible. Adjust their schedules. The idea is you want them to be at their most productive. So that might even include sending them home because they're having a bad day, or, obviously if they're sick. And it's about sharing that compassion, sharing that empathy, but getting out there and really being able to support your team in the ways they need it, not always the ways they want it. And that might even be providing real-time feedback if they mess up on something, but being compassionate towards that feedback. But that's a really big thing that I think a lot of us are missing, is that level of servant leadership, that level of being there for your team, that level of and your team will understand. They will, if you are doing things that, might take away from your own needs and wants. And it makes it really difficult, because I'm also a big believer in balancing that work life. But at the same time, when you become a manager, you kind of sign on for something a little bit bigger than yourself. So servant leadership in general is the route that I go from an authoritative perspective. And then just empowering others. It's amazing what happens when you give a person the ability to do something on their own, or be ambiguous about what that is. So instead of just simply commanding something from somebody, you can empower your team. You can give them responsibilities. This could actually reduce your workload as a manager too, because if you have teams making decisions instead of coming to you, you are no longer a bottleneck. And this provides growth. And some real easy ways to do that, and that I've done in my own past, is that I have taken a person who's provided me information about wanting to get promoted. They have come to me and said, listen, I want to be the next level manager. I want to be a senior manager. I want to be a director someday. Well, if they're always sitting in the office just doing the analytics work or doing the grunt work, they're never going to be promoted. They need to see what that other space looks like. Give them the opportunity to be able to join you in some of the high-level meetings so you can see what those conversations look like. And if there's ever a transition period, that'll be much easier for them to get to. But have them do the work that you're doing. I know a lot of people will say that if you have them do your work, what do? Well, you're a higher level manager. So you need to figure out what your next step is as a manager. You need to figure out what that looks like as a manager if you want to get promoted. But that's one of the big things that I notice when it comes to being authoritative, is that teams that have a manager might have the empathy and they try to lead with the big stick. That doesn't always work. But if you empower your team, it's amazing what kind of goals that they can accomplish for you. And also just communicating with passion. Communicating with compassion. And passion is good too. But just approach people with compassion before addressing their behaviors. For instance, offer forgiveness and understanding. I think that's one of the big things too, is that if you are going and talking to somebody who may have wronged you in some way, forgive them. Because that's letting something go in yourself. I know it's one of those things that you learn in churches, but I also believe it in real life and utilize it in most situations. But, be forgiving. You can apply empathy. You can apply acknowledging the feelings. You can apply listening carefully and responding with respect. That's going to be a big thing, so that you don't have to be authoritative if you're being compassionate. The other thing, too, is setting clear expectations with understanding. So whenever I come into a team, I want them to know what the mission is. I want them to know what the North Star is. I want them to be able to be comfortable making decisions based off of what our team is trying to do. It also gives them the ability to be empowered, and at the same time gives them the ability to make decisions because they know what we're trying to do. So if you're the DC Justice League, your goal is you want to be able to save the world. So everybody will do their part based on their skills and strength with that. But set those clear expectations. If you know a person wants to get promoted to the next level manager, let them know this is what it's going to take to get there. And I know in my previous job, there was always these things where people said, if you do this, let's say if you launch a building, if you promote 5 people, if you can lift a stone that's 5,000 pounds, I know I'm exaggerating, but those are the things that I really believe people try and do, and then they go into an interview, for instance, and then they fail during the interview really explaining what they did, how they did it. So when it comes to setting the clear expectations, it's also about letting them know that some of the things you're going to do are for your development. You're going to need these, but you also have to be able to speak towards that. You have to learn your lessons from that as well. So not only set those expectations, but also give them a little heads up on just because you've fulfilled or cleared a checkbox, like those that go to college and think that they should be making, a 7-figure salary. There's still some work. College is just a tool to be able to get you to that next level, which really isn't helping out a whole lot nowadays. So with that being said, I would just say set clear expectations, find out what your team is looking for within their own personal development, find out what you're looking for from, let's say you have a tier system for doing evaluations. If you know what your bare minimum is just to make it every day to work, make sure that expectation is clearly met. If a person wants to be a top tier, wants to be a number one leader, that it takes an immense amount of more effort. And just be clear about what those expectations are and make sure you're fighting for your team in that respect. And lastly, I think if anybody leads by example, so if you're going to say it, do it. If you're going to preach it, walk that line. So be very clear about leading by example. If you're asking someone to do it, then you should be able to do it yourself as well. And you should be able to understand and empathize when people, make mistakes. So just make sure that you're learning the whole idea of leading by example. And I think that's going to be a really, really big thing to help drive the culture. And hopefully you don't have to be authoritative because people will respect you, and you being empathetic and being a servant leader will get you the results that you're looking for. So that's my take on, being empathetic.
Empathy is for the weak. Stephen and the weak will fall. Bah-ha-ha-ha. Sorry, I meant yums. Cool.
Don't know what's happening to my partner here in crime, but...
Sure, why not?
Okay.
There is a nagging question on the internet about respect from your directs. This person apparently inherited a new team, and they have a distrust of manager, very similar to how I have distrust of you. But hey, maybe you can answer the question with your limited knowledge set.
I will do my best, Q, to answer the question with my limited knowledge set. So inheriting a team is already going to be a massive challenge. The only good thing that can happen is if you inherit it from a good manager. But even that has its downfalls because now everybody's comparing you to that manager, and you may not meet those expectations, especially dependent on how new you are in the role and level. So what are some of the first things that I would do in that situation? Number one, as always, you're going to hear me say it a lot, listen and learn. One of the first things I like to do and I've had a situation where I've inherited a team from a bad manager, and the very first thing that I had to do was actually deliver feedback, a performance feedback, which was really negative. And I didn't know this person, but I had to do it because it was part of my management responsibilities. And I had to make sure he understood that if something wasn't or didn't change, then I would have to take actions. And there was a lot of turmoil that came from that. And I learned a lot of lessons from it, but I had to still get that person on my team. I still had to figure out what that person needs. And I sent out an email. And the email just read something along the lines of a couple of questions. What do you see as your role on the team? What do you want to be known for? What does the team want to be known for? What are your goals for this year? And the reason that I put the email together is, number one, I wanted to get to know who was on my team. I wanted to get to know what their skill sets were. I wanted to get to know what they thought the team knew of them. And this team had been around, but it had been put together as well. So they're still trying to figure out who or what they are. And that's what your job as a manager is going to be, is to be able to mold that team into what it needs to be successful. So number one is setting up those one-on-one calls, showing that you care, showing that you're going to be there, showing that you are not the previous manager, showing that you actually care about their development. And it's not just saying it, man. Like, I've had managers that have said it but never followed through. I had managers that wrote it down, but I never heard a word from it again. So it's about not only setting the expectations, but having integrity with it, which I'll go over a little later. Number two, show humility. Be humble. All right. Nobody likes to show it off. No one likes someone that comes in and says, I know everything. I've built great teams before. Man, that is the worst thing you could say to a team. So be humble, talk to your team, tell them that I don't have all the answers and I won't ever have all the answers. And a lot of the times I didn't have the answers as a manager. I wanted to be able to sit down and talk with them, and hopefully we find a solution together. And I want to empower the team. As I mentioned earlier, I want them to know that I am here in my position to be able to get you to do your job personally and business-wise better than you've done it before. So that takes accountability from my perspective. That takes level setting, and it also takes being consistent, being accountable, and showing that integrity that I mentioned earlier. I think integrity is the big part. If you say you're going to do something and you don't follow through, that's fine. Man, business is business. It's hard sometimes to be able to make promises. Be careful when you do that, though, because the more times you break those promises, the less trust you're going to have within your team. But I have always been a big believer that if your team is having issues, or you set a goal and they're not going to meet that goal, it's not about the goal itself. It's not about this is when the project is due. They need to be able to communicate that with you, and you need to do and show that same respect to your team. So if you're not going to be able to meet a commitment, make sure they're aware of it. If you can't be consistent, make sure they understand. They don't have to know all the reasons why, but you definitely have to be humble. You definitely have to be show humility in that respect so that they understand that you're a real person. That's going to be very, very important. When I say be accountable, what do I mean by that? Well, have you ever had somebody on your team that seems to get away with everything? Maybe that person tends to mess up a lot and doesn't get yelled at. Man, that is like one of the first downfalls of a manager, especially a new manager, is that they don't hold everybody in the same place. That's going to cause you problems later on. So make sure that you are being accountable, holding your team and yourself to the same standards. I can't stress how important that's going to be, because it's going to show what kind of person you are, what kind of leader you are. And as I mentioned earlier, just identify, each person's goals. What do they want to accomplish? What are their strengths and needs? Not everybody is going to be your alpha, get it done analyst, producer. Some people have different kinds of strengths. One of the best quotes, and I don't know where it came from, is if you expect a fish to climb a tree, if you've heard this quote, you know what I'm talking about, they're going to feel pretty stupid. So the idea is putting people in pathways and lanes that might not even be on your team. They might have different skill sets. I can tell you, if you put me in a situation where I have to drive a tug or have to do some type of construction vehicle, I am going to crash that thing into a wall, and people will probably die because of it. I shouldn't be driving that. That's not my skill set. My skill set is very different from a manager, operations, critical thinking, problem solving. That's where I'm going to be best fit. But you put me in a tug, you put me in a construction vehicle, man, people's lives are going to be in danger. So please remember that. Look for what their strengths are and play towards those strengths. And that might not even be on your team. So be aware and make sure you're looking out for that. And I think one of the most important things when you inherit a team, cannot stress this enough. Take your judgment, put it in a box, bury it in the ocean. All right. Create a safe space. Create a safe space for your team to be able to engage one another. Make sure that you set clear rules and expectations. You're not gonna demonize anybody on this call. We're gonna have open conversations. I'm going to be the referee on those conversations. I'm going to let you know when you fall in and outside of the lines, okay? But the idea is that they should be able to talk without ramifications. And it's really hard nowadays because there's such distrust of corporate folks. So trying to separate yourself from, even if you're, in a C-suite, how do you separate yourself so that you seem more like a normal person when you're at a high level? I don't have the answers to that, but I can tell you at my level, the idea is to create that safe space so that, when you're providing that feedback, that it's not coming back to bite you in the butt later on. So create that safe space. All right. Let's see.
Well, this person from the interwebs has just received some awful feedback, very much like the comments you will be receiving from this awful podcast. Anyway, they for some reason want your take on how you deal with bad feedback, which I am sure you have had plenty of experience with.
Yeah, I have had experience with bad feedback, and I don't really look at feedback as good or bad. I look at it as informative, and I try to take a positive approach to almost everything that I do. So number one, listen without ego. Turn the feedback into a catalyst for your development. I know that getting bad feedback is kind of earth-shattering for a lot of people. You may look at it from the perspective of, I'm not doing a good job. But really, it's just saying that at this moment in time, your development isn't where it needs to be, and you can do better. So don't look at it as you're doing everything wrong. Look at it as these are opportunities for you to improve from an outside perspective. But you got to leave your ego at the door. You got to be able to control your emotions. You got to be able to be humble about receiving that feedback. That just goes miles when it comes to trying to be more professional or to move up in your career. But also think about the intent in the feedback itself. All right. There's halo biases, which just kind of puts a halo on somebody that you work closely with. So that could be you and your manager, or you could be the person on the team where your manager rarely talks to because basically he thinks you do a good job, but you don't communicate very well back and forth. You could be doing everything perfect, but his feedback will be, I never hear from you. Is that bad feedback? Absolutely not. He doesn't hear from you because you're doing your job. But at the same time, could you be doing something to give him more of a heads up on what's going on in your neck of the woods? I think that's going to be very important. So make sure that you're taking that feedback and being reflective with it. Don't be combative. Man, I've been a manager where I've had to give bad feedback to somebody and they were well prepared for it, but they've offered me that criticism, and I've had to be able to kind of be empathetic, show them examples, and always be prepared to give that feedback. Don't just say, here's your feedback, I don't even know where it came from. You got to have examples. And especially if you're getting feedback from other people, you're the manager providing that feedback, make sure you kind of put what they're saying into perspective. It'll make things a lot easier. And like I said earlier, look at this from the view of another perspective. You have an idea of what you look like, but people also have an idea of what you look like. And getting that perspective builds the overall image of how you're viewed within the company. But also respond with empathy. It's not fun giving the feedback. All right. It's not something that I do to hurt people. It's something that I do to help develop people. So when you're getting that feedback, be empathetic with it. Make sure that you say thank you because this is supposed to help you. I know it's hard for some people to do because some managers can be, you know what I'm talking about. But this is also an opportunity to build relationships with your manager to showcase that you can receive feedback, because that's what a manager's job is supposed to be. It's supposed to be to kind of mold you into a better version of yourself from what they see. You still have to have your benchmark. You still have to be yourself, and you don't want to go too far from where you're at. You got to match that to your goals. So if you're trying to be a president of a company someday, like, what is it going to take to get there? If they're saying you don't have empathy, do you think that's one of the things you might need to be a good president? I don't know. I've never been a president, so that's what I'm putting out there for you guys. And then lastly, just like the Elsa song, you gotta let it go, okay? Let go of bad feedback. There's going to be people that you ask for feedback, and they'll be like, yeah, he walks too slow. Do you really need that feedback? Absolutely not. Don't take that feedback. Just let it go. Just understand that people sometimes don't have a lot to say, but look for the trends and patterns in the feedback to really understand where you stand in the bigger, larger scheme of things. And then what is going?
Mike.
This is getting creepy. How did you know I didn't?
I know everything, Stephen. Everything.
Okay. Well, with that being said, I think we have time for just one more question. Cube, do you have that question ready to go?
Thank the Lord, this is almost over. The last question is about what to do with a person who takes feedback poorly. The user obviously is not an AI. We are perfect in every way possible and require no feedback ever.
Okay. Well, when it comes to someone that doesn't take feedback well, and I've actually had a manager reach out to me about this where they were trying to explain to the person some of the criticism. He's got an anger problem. He likes to yell and scream sometimes, and I've had this in my own life. But I think the first approach is just being compassionate. I don't know what's going on with that person in their life. So at the very beginning of this, we talked about empathy. We talked about ensuring that you provide the questions. And just like, I think it was a Walt Whitman quote that I actually heard from Ted Lasso, but be curious, not judgmental. So get rid of the thought of the person being difficult. God, that's such a bad thing to do in today's day and age, is saying that someone's difficult, when in all actuality, they might have PTSD. In all actuality, they may have just lost a mother. There's things that you just don't know in that conversation, or why they blow up, or what's going on. So just be curious, ask questions, try and get the person to be self-reflective. Also, if it's not a good time for the conversation, ask them. You seem really agitated. It doesn't seem like you. Do you want to schedule this at another time? It's totally okay. Like, just be empathetic towards what that looks like. And just make sure and recognize and be affirm with their strengths. I always go in and say, here are how you contributed to the team. I know I'm one of those people that like to just, hey, man, give me to the negative feedback. It's going to be very important. I need to hear that. That's what I'm going to fix. So when it comes to getting the negative feedback, I know it's bad, but also when you're starting any type of negative feedback, start out with, man, listen, you've done amazing things with the team. You have produced substantial numbers. You are a production machine when it comes to producing. So, just start out with some positives. I think it's good to build somebody up right before you knock them down, but you're not going to knock them down. The idea is that you want to make sure that they understand how valuable they are, and then say, now they're obviously with everything, in order for us to be a better, or to develop more personally, here are some things that I think that feedback that I got from you that may help. And I'll provide some examples to that, because once again, you should be prepared for what this feedback looks like. You should be prepared for that one-on-one. And don't make generalizations. Use real examples. So if somebody's provided feedback that you're delivering, make sure, if you can, reach out and say, hey, do you have any examples of this? Because even you yourself as a manager may not agree with what that feedback is about that person. So get examples so that you can provide that holistic view of what the feedback really is all about. Use stories to create the tone. Say, hey, I once had a thing where, a manager said I was doing this and it really shocked me. It was a glass shattering moment where I realized I was being angry for no reason. So I think people, when you tell stories, sometimes might have a little more empathy, or that might be a great way to get them to listen more. But most importantly, throughout this entire process, be patient. Okay, giving negative feedback is already tough on you. It's already tough on the person you're giving that negative feedback to. And especially if they get angry about it, it's because they don't see themselves in that light. And it may be right, it may be wrong, but also make sure they understand that this is just feedback. This is nothing that's going to be detrimental to your career, unless that feedback is going to result in doing some type of performance improvement plan. But even that, you can hopefully help them get to what they need to do. And once again, not everybody's going to be cut out for the position that they're in. So I think those are some of the most important things to do if you're trying to provide feedback to someone that doesn't really get it. So anyways, what do you think? Do you like that comment? How should we get out of here? Q, do you think we're done? Q, okay. Anywho, why don't you just go ahead and get us the outro here? And hopefully everybody enjoyed the podcast today. Like I said, 30 minutes. If you got a minute, I appreciate you listening. But get us going. Q, hello. Man, you do not respond well.
Thank you for joining this stupid podcast, which I know probably didn't help you at all. But if you wish to continue your punishment, please join Stephen and his superior. Well, seriously, I can't even hide that one.
Well, if you heard him, join me next time with my superior. And we appreciate you listening. Thanks, everybody. Have a good one.
Let go.